5 seconds.
Recording in progress.
Ok? Sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Meu nome é Maiana Eloy. Eu sou mestre.
Welcome. I am Maiana. I am a master student at the University of Rio de Janeiro, and I'll be the host of this event. I want to thank the presence of all of you, and you can activate the translation in our platform so you can hear the speeches. So you should click on the interpreting globe on the bottom of the page. Then you can choose the language you wish, Portuguese or English. If you are watching us from the cell phone, you can click on the 3 dots on the top of your screen. You choose interpretation, and then you can choose Portuguese or English and confirm. Now we're gonna do the same instructions in English. This webinar is being recorded.
My name is Maiana. I'm a master student in Science and Health Education with RJ. And today, I will be the master of ceremony of this event. It's a pleasure to you without us today, and I will explain how you can activate the interpretation to at Zoom. Click at the globe interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen. Then select the option English and confirm. If you are watching for your mobile phone, please press the 3 dots in the upper right corner. Click at the option Interpretation, select English language, and confirm. It's also important to mention this event has been recorded. Neste momento, daremos início ao ciclo de oficinas políticas antirracistas nas
Now we're
universidades.
going to start our workshop about anti-racist policies in universities. That's going to happen on the 7th and 9th July through Zoom. This project is a result of a partnership between NUTS Institute and Grace Euclid. We are going to discuss this colonization process in the field of research, action, affirmative action, using the example of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil and of the University of Central Lancashire in the United Kingdom. This event is composed by 3 workshops lasting 1 hour each. After our opening table, we are going to start our first workshop, Policies, Anti-Racist Policies and Practices in Higher Education. On Friday, we'll have another workshop about Black women and opportunities within academia. And the third workshop, we're going to discuss the pandemic, inequality in health, and the role of universities. I want to thank you, the presence of the public, of the speakers, the translators, and the technical staff. This activity is being broadcast through Grace channel and the channel of anti-racist policies from the UFRJ channel. After the first workshop, we'll open to Q&A session. Comments and questions can be sent through the bottom Q&A in the bottom of the page in Zoom. Well, to start our workshop, we invite our mediators, the Manager of Equality Inclusion of UCLAM, member of the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Department, Sueli Newlove, a nutritionist, master in public health, and a doctor student at the University of Rio de Janeiro, Tamires Pérez. We also have as guests Luzia Conceição Marques, who is a doctor in sciences in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, Pro-Dean of Personal in the University of Rio de Janeiro, nurse in the University Hospital of Faraga Filho, and Professor Pradeep Passi, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Director at UCLAN. He is also a member of panels for advanced higher education, for inclusion of gender, Athena Swam in the certification of racial inclusion, for the Race Equality Charter mark. Professor Sueli is going to talk a little bit about some absences that we have today, and I'll give the floor to Professor Sueli and to Tamires. Thanks a lot, Mariana.
Good morning, Brazil.
Bom dia, Brasil.
I'm delighted to be part of this partnership between UCLAN and the NUTS Institute at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro to bring this project to life. And I'm really honored to bring Brazilian and English folks together to share our passions, common passions, advocacy, academic activism, and alternatives to make racial equality a reality. And this can be tangible by embracing an anti-racist model, as Angela Davis has encouraged us to do so. Indeed, we are tired of unfairness, bigotry, and ignorance, but we are surrounded by allies. The power that springs from social movements and education can give us hope and cure. In the last 1.5 years, obviously with this pandemic, it has unveiled existing inequalities, especially the ones caused by the status quo of racism. Unfortunately, we have heard and seen in the UK and in Brazil many lived experiences from survivors. British government and institutions in the past and present have not adopted a robust and effective practices and policies to tackle this issue. However, it is important to recognize universities are not an exception to this reality, to this issue. However, it is really important to mention, despite the students and the staff being the instrumental vanguard for a real cultural shift, it is without real commitment and support from decision makers. Without it, we can't cause the real impact that we need. Stephen Lawrence in the past, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor in America, Greenfield residency in the UK, Caitlin Bromell and Miguel Otávio, most recently in Brazil. These were not isolated cases, but only a small fraction of the totality of casualties from a well-established post-colonial racist ethos. Racism is also a pandemic that requires urgent conscientiousness. From Paulo Freire, Professor Paulo Freire was having this vision, and he said, indeed, the interests of the oppressors lie in changing the consciousness of the oppressed, not the situation which oppresses them. So I'm going to mention, when we were talking about this project, we decided that this is not a comparative study, but also a project that correlates two different realities from very different countries. And I'm going to highlight some of these differences in this slide I'm going to share with you now, just to give an idea what I mean. So we have those two realities in Brazil. Can you see those slides? Yeah, okay. See if it goes forwards. So in terms of overview of population, number of universities, the cost to study in those universities, how the recruitment happens in the university, racial quotas as well, and legislation. So in the UK, we have 56.1 million inhabitants, and the majority is 86% white, and then people of color, 8% of Asian, 3% of Black, 3% of mixed. This is a data from 2011 census, and that includes England and Wales population. So in Brazil, we have almost 4 times bigger population, 211 million, and 56% Black, brown, including indigenous, and then 44% white. 281 is the number of universities in Brazil, and then 2,608 is the total of universities in Brazil, or in the UK, 281. So you have the minority of this number in Brazil is public universities, only 302, and the vast majority is private. In terms of cost, UK and Wales, students have to pay a quite expensive tuition fees to apply and to study in these institutions. But in Scotland, it's free. Like in Brazil, public university is free as well, but the private tuition fees apply, so people have to pay. Recruitment, how does it happen in the UK? Is the staff application forms, interviews, like we do for private jobs. And the students' application also is based, the place destinated for them to study at universities is based in A-levels and GCSEs. The staff in Brazil is recruited for universities via public civil service exam. It's a very competitive process, and students, they are submitted for the national exam called NM. It's a national exam. Quotas are illegal in the UK, and then only positive action is accepted. And quotas are legal in Brazil, and I know Professor Van Tuyl will talk more in detail about that in his presentation. And then in Brazil, you have 50% of the places in public reserved for students from Black and Indigenous heritage who are from public schools. So addressing the social class element. And in terms of legislation, we have here in the UK, the Equality Act 2010, and other legislation on hate crime in the universities as well to support. And then in Brazil, we have the racial equality law, and then racial equality quotas law from 2010, 2012, and also 2014 for the civil servants quotas as well in public service jobs. So why this project matters is because it's deconstruct the predominant Eurocentric approach in academia. So we want more inclusive curriculum and then a very well, centered, more inclusive a more inclusive agenda in the universities, removing visibility of the global south as well. And in that way, West can listen and learn more from academics and the community voices in the global south. And also, we want to increase partnerships, collaborative transdisciplinary projects, funding, research, and also to recognize the values of diversity and visibility to other cultures and language, and then investigate the rooting causes of the lack of representation for people of color in higher education. So obviously we have challenges, and the long-term goals for inclusion, although there is a pressing issue, a need for change, but some of these are long-term goals. Some decades will take, or more than 10, 20 years in some organizations. Cultural change as well is slow, and also it's important to remove the taboos, because talking about racism is still a taboo, and difficult conversations must continue, and it's important. And the negationist narrative, the white middle class, and trying to clash white people with the people of color, Black movements, negating the evidence of white privilege, talking about white supremacy. So all these is being, there is a movement negating with negationism about that, and increased patriotic jingoism. So just to finalize, in relation to these last points, because it's something quite evident and present at the moment in the post-Brexit era, this post-Brexitian and jingoist narratives promoted by governments in Brazil and the UK proved to be a powerful political tool that can perpetuate power and win elections. Consequently, racial prejudice and discrimination can also be perpetuated if effective measures are not put in place. It's also important to consider intersectionality between race and other identities, such as gender, faith, sexual orientation. Black women is still the most disadvantaged and least represented in the workforce. There are 350 Black female professors only in the UK, out of a number of 18,000 professors across the country. Great hostility is also faced by refugees who forcibly desert their homes, crossing the English Channel for safety and to build a new life. But they can face now is the threat of the Borders Bill that criminalizes human rights. The Windrush generation, another group here, and their descendants are another incontestable example of racialized hostility that fails to recognize the contribution of Black African Caribbean people has given to this country during the post-war era. But instead, Black African British families are facing threats of deportations, and they can hear the echoing messages: you don't belong here, you are not welcome here, even for the ones who actually were born here. Compensation reparation schemes are made impossible for them to claim. I'm a strong believer that initiatives like these can take us to greater achievements. However, it is important to recognize that we are far from where we need to be in achieving racial equality in higher education. Although this might be a long way from us, but not an impossible journey, because we resist. And I will finalize my talk here, which is taking longer than I expected. Apologies. I'm a strong believer that I will say what the greatest Chico Buarque poet said: when I will meet you, without a doubt, perhaps in times of kindness. And this is a perfect time for unity and solidarity. It is my pleasure to meet you all here today, and I look forward to learning from our Brazilian and English friends. Thank you very much. I will pass now to Tamiris to give your presentation.
Bom dia, bom dia.
Good morning, good morning. I salute here my ancestors and greet everyone here. I'll be reading to optimize the time and help with the work of our translators. It's with great joy that we have built this partnership between the Newt's Institutes for Education in Science and Health and the Global Center for Racial Equality at UCLA, materialized in this cycle of workshops that we aim here the dialogue and exchange of concrete practices for the transformation of our universities. I speak from the standpoint of an Afro-Brazilian woman living in a young nation with one of the highest concentrations of income and in one of the most unequal countries in the world, particularly in the pandemic. Now, a latecomer to the formal abolition of slavery in Americas only in 1888, and today the majority of the population self-declares itself black or brown, according to the Statistic Institute, but every 23 minutes, one young black man is killed. A country that, against all the expectations, has one of the most complex, universal, and free public health systems of continental dimensions in Latin America, that has been saving hundreds of thousands of lives in this pandemic in spite of the politics of hate and death of this misgovernment. And, and according to the data you saw with Sueli, we have an expressive network of higher education institutions, 200 2,608, and from those 302 public ones. Uh, um, and I'm part of the public one. This country, even having these official public health and education services, have denied for decades, according to the modus operandi of structural and institutional racism, the right of access, equal treatment, and quality to the Black population, other traditional peoples and communities. This country is also the one that, under pressure from social movements, has been transforming the profile of the student body in our universities since the 2000s. More precisely, since 2012, when the quota laws was enacted that establish constitutional policies of positive discriminations by reserve 50% of university places for students coming from public schools. Yeah, among them, specific percentages of Black, Indigenous, and disabled, according to the city. So uh, now at this point today, Blacks became a majority among students in the public universities. This is a very, very important point, although we are a very long way of really being there where we need to be. Why then this exchange between UFRJ and UCLAN? For me, what motivates this project and expresses the main lesson that I learned with the Black movement in Brazil is the perception that it is not possible to advance in concrete policies of equality, diversity, and inclusion if we do not invest radically in the power of the difference as a positive value. Above all, in a country that, under the veil of the racial democracy, has established one of the most powerful systems of power, oppression, erasure, and discrimination. That's the Brazilian racism. Defending differences as a starting point means looking at our societies, at the different ethnic, racial, gender, and sexual orientation groups beyond the examinations of the inequalities and oppression to which they are sub, subjected. It means understand then beyond what was relegated by the colonizer oppressor and is embedded in the imaginary of our societies. Difference as a positive values invite us to learn from the contributions that these subjects offer to the world. their cosmoperception, their epistemes, their politicities, their cultures, their poetry. In other words, it's only by acknowledging and welcoming difference is that we can promote an agenda of equity, foster diversity, establish equality, and ensure full inclusion. In this sense, I recognize that we always have something to learn from what is different from us, what that I do not exist without the other. This other that, because she, he, or them is the other alien to me, makes me unique. I recognize the importance of connecting with anti-racist strategies, policies, and practices that are being built by other diasporic brothers and sisters in the UK. Without mechanical transpositions, I believe that knowing how, in their distinct contexts, they create anti-racist strategies, policies, and practices in their universities, the ways in which they seek opportunities for Black women in the academy, the means they use to address health inequalities, and can only increase our creative repertoire and possibilities for reflection and action. Now I pass the floor to Professor Luzia.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to share your dream, a dream of cooperation, of interaction between us, Brazilians, and the United Kingdom. I salute Professor Pradeep Pasi, Sueli, and Tamires. I also congratulate the organizational staff and the coordination of this beautiful project about two countries, so different countries, Brazil and the United Kingdom. Yes, it is important to have this exchange about the best practice related to anti-racist policies and practices, because even though we are different countries, the Black woman and the Black man is a victim of racism here and there. Our realities are the same everywhere. So it is very important that we can and share our differences and our experiences. Next slide, please.
Eu não sei se ele já projetou, se você puder projetar, deixa eu pegar aqui.
Well, I don't think we can see your slide. Where is it? Just 1 minute.
You're sharing that.
Minutinho que a gente já vai compartilhar a apresentação.
Posso ir falando, então?
Pode ir falando, professora.
Ah, então tá, deixa eu ir falando. Eu preciso colocar o meu lugar de fala. Luzia Araújo, mulher negra, nascida na favela de Vigário Geral.
Well, I am a Black woman. I was born in a favela in Vigário Geral. I had my major degree in 1989, where we didn't had at the time the quotas. I'm a doctorate in the University of Medicine from the University of Rio de Janeiro. Now I am the pre-dean in the University of Rio de Janeiro, and I'm a professor in the University of Rio de Janeiro, where I coordinate a continuing education project that discusses education and how it can win many racial inequalities. So, what do we do about this? In the struggle against racism and against the invisibility of Black women and men, we have some axes of our actions. Firstly, Black women, because racism creates a gender
situação maior de vulnerabilidade social. A Lei 12.990, de 2014, que é a Lei de Cotas no Serviço Público Federal, que já vimos que é uma especificidade do Brasil, e ela é uma medida constitucional que reserva para negros e pardos 20% das vagas em concursos públicos. A Lei 12.771,
With respect to the legislation, we have the 2012, the racial quota in Brazil that guarantees the inclusion of racial quota in the undergrad courses and in the graduate courses. We also have actions of training and capacity building in this topic, and we also have social movements with focus on anti-racist actions. What about the policy within UFRJ? Well, it did not start now. It has happened with the proposition of actions that contribute to the struggle against racism, and it promotes prioritally minority groups. It is important to remember, as Angela Davis said, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, but we must be anti-racist. We need to observe with a critical sense and to be agent of change and to be a protagonist with measures of facing within the institution to the racism and not just reporting racist crime and simply to recognize this struggle simply because we have Black friends. The anti-racist practice needs to be anti-racist. This is a constant struggle that needs responses to the change of structures because the racism is structural, is institutional, and it keeps white people with their privilege. This here was an event that we had in 2019 that we implemented our continuing education platform, and it was over in 2020. With respect to the continuing education activities in our university, here I have some examples. We have some literature workshop, Black feminism workshops, affirmative actions workshops, a journey in psychology and ethnic racial relations, a course in anti-racist education, and we also have a platform that promotes anti-racist digital feminism approach. We also have some research groups that works with the racial relations in our university is also important to our struggle. Here we have some of these groups. Group Afro-Science, Lab of African Studies, Transcultural Group, Group of Ecology of Narratives, Group of History and Legislation of Ancine, Gefrode, Negrin, Lab on Research and Social Movements, Race, Body and Gender, lab in ethnic racial studies, and the lab about racial relationships. And what about the representativeness? Well, we have many initiatives in our university. Well, here are some data of the Brazilian Statistics Institute has shown that in 2020, 54% of Brazilian population is Black. Well, if we have 50%, this is not a minority, so we can say that we are the majority and not a minority, as we've been told during our life, and leaving us in spaces where we are invisible. And in our university, how many are we? Male, females, and we have the retired staff, 2033, 314, and this is from May. And what about our race? This was the question raised by Professor Vantuil Pereira. So we raised this question to research our professors and the technical staff in UFRJ. We have this data from 2021, and we had that 77% were white within the professors and staff, 14% were mixed, 6% were Black, indigenous people 0.25, and Asians 1.15. Well, it is important to say that those are raw data and they cannot be analyzed in an isolated way. It's important to highlight that some of the forms were filled in by substitute teachers, professors, and we know that they are not a permanent staff because they belong to they work in the university for only 2 years. Another hypothesis is that the group of Blacks and mixed were more mobilized to answer this research. So we had higher data on this research. It shows that the presence of Black professors and researchers is shy within our university. At UFRJ and in the public servant service and in the society, it is not hard or difficult to realize the presence of Black people, even though we are the majority of the population. Beyond struggling for the inclusion of Blacks in our society, we need to extend the discussion of this and enlarge the awareness of Black and white people so they can understand more about racism and their negative results. When I got into the university in 1985, I used to look around and I didn't see the presence of Black women and men. Where do they live? Where do they study? Where do they go? With the time, the lonely path has been filled by affirmative action policies that came to correct racial discrimination within society. It is important to remember that the occupation of this space by Black women and men is not a privilege. It's a way to guarantee rights, justice, and equity. The adoption of affirmative actions changes the reality of our lives. We occupy places in higher education, We are present in undergrad
several
courses,
courses of
but in a shy way in
undergraduation and
undergraduate
graduation
courses.
courses.
We know that it is important to go beyond if we want to fix and to effectively think the inequality that comes from our heritage that resulted from as a structural racism, and as a consequence we face racist actions every way and every day. On the decade for people of African descent, United Nations has proclaimed this decade as the International Decade for People of African Descent. We were invited to implement activities anti-racist, turned to the knowledge, justice, and development with concrete measures against racism and racial discrimination, xenophobia, intolerance faced by people of African descent, trying to repair historical inequalities. The actions in our universities happens as an effective policy in the undergrad.
Organizou-se o acesso dos alunos aos cursos de graduação após verificação pela comissão. Na pós-graduação, o Conselho de Ensino para Pós-Graduados aprovou a Resolução 3 de 2018, que permitiu aos programas de pós-graduação
that has allowed the graduation programs to adopt quotas in their grants projects. We have 132 graduation programs. 55 have adopted quotas based in this resolution. It was implemented in our university for the first time in its history in 2020. The scholarships for scientific initiation for affirmative actions. Other affirmative actions that were adopted were different score for graduation with affirmative actions policies that was implemented for visitors, professors, and other actions to guarantee the process. Leverage courses, language courses for preparation, examine if proficiency in language, in English language. We are discussing a new resolution for quotas and other affirmative actions for graduation courses. In 2019, we're able to establish a percentage defined to make available the places for public servant exam and for technical services and technical workers, considering the total number of places in its announced. So this way we were able to guarantee 20% of the places for these people. Until then, we only had quotas for the position that had at least 3 spaces available. But it almost never happens. With the professors, the University Council approved the resolution in 2020 that established rules for careers. So the places that are reserved for affirmative actions are distributed in a way to respect the percentage that are defined by law. The distribution is realized taking consideration first the academic reality that presents the best proportion of Black professors and people with disabilities. This is done with the support of the Forum of Racial Policies that is destined to debate, to propose, and to build practices in defense of human rights according to anti-racist policies and according to anti-racist and avoiding the racial harassment. This group has a pioneer role in the hetero-identification, and we have worked since 2019 in the universities with the capacity building for people to work in commissions of hetero-identification all over the country. This training started in 2019, and now it's also done in the undergraduation courses, and is led by a white man who presides this group as a mechanism didactic in the anti-racist struggle. As final consideration today, we observe that our university is no longer occupied only by white people or predominantly by white people in the undergrad courses. The occupation by Black professors still is very small, and this reflects a very discriminatory society, and its reflexes are felt within the university. It's necessary to create, to prove means in a way to promote really the inclusion of Black women and Black men at the university. We are still far from an effective implementation of a policy that can contribute with the equity. Having the 20% of Black professors in our university is a dream, but as Cervantes says, and also our singer Raul Seixas also sang, when you dream alone, it's just a dream. But when we dream together, it's the beginning of the reality. And I start to realize that more people have a dream like me. I'm a woman, Black woman with a master and a doctorate. And I am from a generation previous to the affirmative actions policies. I'm the only one in my family to reach this space. The struggle now is to broaden the horizons of other Lucias and other Marias and Josés and Joãos, to minimize and even to make disappear the violence and racism situations, during the work and if possible in the life. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, professora. Uma excelente apresentação, resumindo.
Thanks a lot, Professor, with this excellent presentation. And we ask the participants and the attendees to address your questions so we can answer at the end.
To talk and do his opening talk in relation to UCLAN. Pradeep is our Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, also co-director of the Grace Institute. Pradeep, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That's great. Can I just check you can see the screen, Soili? Have I got my slides up?
Not yet, Pradeep.
Okay, I'm trying my best here.
Yeah, it's coming now. It'll probably take a bit of time. That's it. Okay,
fantastic. Thank you for that. Absolutely delighted to be part of this dialogue with UFRJ in Rio de Janeiro. It's an exciting opportunity, I think, for us to really share some knowledge and share some practice so that we can really begin to improve in terms of anti-racist practice and making kind of the education sector a fairer place for everybody to study in, to work in, and to be in. So thank you, Professor Lucia, Professor Tamiris, Sueli, for putting this together and for sharing your thoughts. And in terms of UCLan, University of Central Lancashire, it'd be great if we can continue this dialogue after the event today. I'm just going to kind of give you a brief kind of overview of how we tackle racial disparities here in the UK and in the university sector in the UK, and just some practices that we have here at the University of Central Lancashire. So first of all, welcome. Bem-vindo. That's probably about the best Portuguese I can do today. So it's great to be here. Just in terms of our university, we are a university that's based in a small city called Preston, which is in the north of England. We are a university that draws most of its students from our local area. And in our university, we have approximately 30,000 students. Around about 26% of those students come from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background. The majority of those students being from an Asian background. We only have about 4 or 5% of our students of a Black origin. In terms of our staff, we have around about 3,000 academic and professional staff here within UCLan. And of those staff, we have around about 13% who are from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background. So you can see there there is an underrepresentation when we're looking at our staff population. We have 6 faculties in the university. You can see those there, which are clinical and biomedical sciences, science and technology, culture and creative industries, business and justice, allied health and well-being, health and care. And we also have a campus in Cyprus as well, which gives us a place in Europe, because as you know, we have now exited the European Union as a country, but we still do have a presence there in Cyprus, which is great. So today's presentation, I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of key challenges that we have in relation to racial inequalities here in the UK. I'll talk a little bit about anti-racist frameworks that are in place here in the UK and in the higher education sector to tackle racial inequalities, and then happy to take any questions. And I would encourage participants to put their questions in their chat so that we can answer those and come to those at the end. So this is how I like to kind of view anti-racism. If you see the left-hand picture there, that is what I would call a kind of a non-discriminatory approach, where everybody has a crate to look over the fence to watch the game. But actually, obviously, even if everyone has a crate, not everybody can actually see over the fence. So we might then sort of say, okay, fine, we will give some people an extra crate. And the extra crate then allows them to see into the game and watch the game, which is the second picture there. The third picture is maybe the reality of where most people are, in that some people have all of the crates or most of the crates, and some people don't, and therefore they get the best view, the best of everything, and so on. Really, if we're taking an anti-racist approach, what we need to be doing is taking down the barriers completely so that everybody can participate in the game equally and see the game equally without the barriers there. And that's really is the challenge, I think, that we have when we look at kind of anti-racism and whether as organizations we are taking that really truly anti-racist approach, or whether we are just kind of putting sticking plasters over some of the issues there. So racial inequalities in the UK higher education sector. So this is across all the universities in the UK, and as Sueli pointed out earlier on, we have over 200 universities in the UK. And over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, there has been an increased focus on equality, on diversity and inclusion within universities, trying to ensure that people from all backgrounds, from disadvantaged backgrounds, are able to access universities, because it is widely held belief, I think it's probably true, that if you have a higher education, your life chances are much greater. So there has been this focus, and particularly since the murder of George Floyd 18 months ago, we've seen an increased focus, particularly around race equality and racial inequalities within universities, and really kind of looking at ourselves to see what we are doing and what we are not doing. We are very much a data-led sector, so there is data collected on our staff, on our students, at a national and a local level. And so in terms of really understanding what the profile of our staff and students are, this is something that we have access to, and it's good to see also in your university in Brazil that you have similar data collection mechanisms, because that really gives us the kind of picture of what is going on. Also in the UK, we have our regulatory body, which is called the Office for Students, which also has given some quite challenging targets and goals for all universities in the UK to achieve, and I'll talk about those in a moment. However, despite all of that, we still have it across the whole university sector here in the UK, what we call award gaps. So award gaps in the UK are gaps in the difference between top grades that are awarded to Black, Asian, and minority students compared to top grades that are provided to white students. And in the UK, on average, Black and Asian students are around about 15% less likely to achieve the top grades. And this has obviously implications for their future employment and their future study into postgraduate. We still have large issues, as you do in Brazil and in your university, around diversity of the staff profile. And although I mentioned that we have here in UCLan around about 13% of our staff from a Black and Asian background, we know that's underrepresented in terms of the student body, but also as you get into the more senior levels within the organization, that percentage goes down significantly. So the majority of our Black and Asian staff are at the more junior grades. Curriculum is a big issue here in the UK, and there's lots of kind of work going on around looking at the curriculum and the content of what we deliver to students, the majority of which at the moment is kind of Western, Eurocentric, global North perspectives across many of our programs. And we're looking to see how in the curriculum we can introduce broader perspectives, perspectives from the global South, perspective from different ethnicities and nationalities, etc. And so there's a lot of work going on around the curriculum. And of course, finally, there's a lot of work going on around university culture. Unfortunately, we know racial harassment and discrimination does still go on. It is still present within the sector, and there have been a number of reports over the last couple of years, 2 years, which point that out, that both students and staff from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds do suffer from racial harassment. In the UK, we do have a legal framework as well as do in Brazil. Our legal framework is through the Equality Act of 2010, which does make it unlawful to directly or indirectly discriminate on the grounds of race, ethnicity, nationality, national origins, plus 8 other characteristics, such as gender and sexual orientation, in employment or in the provision of goods and services. So it is unlawful to discriminate here in the UK on 9 characteristics, including race and ethnicity. In addition, public sector organisations have also legal requirements to have due regard to the need to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation, to advance equality of opportunity between people who share protected characteristics and those who do not, and thirdly, to foster good relations between people who share a protected characteristic and those who do not. So there is a legal requirement for organisations to have due regard. Some would argue that's not enough. We have to demonstrate that we have thought about it, that we have considered it. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to take action. And this is a criticism of this legislation, of not being strong enough. It's interesting to hear in Brazil, you are allowed to positively discriminate. You are able to have quotas for students. I wasn't quite clear whether that you were allowed to have quotas for staff. So we're not allowed to do that in the UK. So if we want to make changes, we have to take other measures, which means that we cannot positively discriminate. And that does kind of make it more challenging. And it'll be interesting to kind of have a discussion around that later on. So there's a legal framework there. This is our regulatory body, the Office for Students. So they have the overview and regulate how universities have to operate here in the UK, and they have set some national targets for the elimination of disparities in higher education. And one of those is to eliminate the unexplained gap in degree outcomes. In the UK, they've banded as first, that's the top grade for a degree, and then a 2-1, which is the second highest grade, and then a 2-2, and then a third class degree, and then a pass. So the university sector has been challenged to eliminate the unexplained gap in degree outcomes between white students and black students by 2024-25, and to eliminate the absolute gap by 2030 to 31. As I mentioned earlier on, the Black, Asian and minority ethnic award gap is around about 14%, 15% here in the UK. When you look at black students, that award gap rises to 23%. So it's more significant for black students. And the Office for Students has said to universities you must eliminate this gap. Universities are required to have access and participation plans, which outline how the university intends to eliminate this gap and other gaps that we have for some of our student groups. And ultimately, the Office for Students does have the power to impose penalties and sanctions on individual universities if targets and goals are not met. The Office for Students was set up around about 5 years ago, and I'm not aware of any universities that have been given any penalties so far in relation to not meeting the targets in the access and participation plan. The other tool that we have here is the Race Equality Charter. This is a voluntary tool. It is a voluntary award that universities can take part in, and it is an award that recognises good practice in tackling racial inequalities. So it was launched in 2015. You have bronze, silver, gold levels, and approximately 15% of universities in the UK have a bronze award. No university has a silver or a gold at the moment. You really have to demonstrate that you're making progress, that you've had some impact, and so on. So the Charter reviews a number of things. It looks at a number of things within universities. And what are universities doing to tackle racial inequalities? It is very much a data-led submission, so there's lots of data that we have to present in relation to staff, in relation to students. It looks at, in very great detail, the recruitment of students. So are we recruiting a diverse group of students into the university? Are there some groups of students not accessing university? What are we doing about that? We look at the way students progress through university. So how many students drop out? How many students continue with their studies and complete their studies? And that is looked at in terms of those racial and ethnic characteristics, so we can see if there's equality there. And it looks at then attainment of students as well, and how well students do. The third thing that is looked at is the recruitment and progression of academic and professional staff in the organisation. So where, even to the level of analysing the data in relation to who applies for jobs, who is shortlisted for interview, who is appointed, and the career development, and again broken down by racial and ethnic groups. So we can see where the disparities are in the processes. It looks at culture and the way in which we promote racial equality in the organisation. It looks at learning and teaching approaches within the organisation to see whether it is inclusive, to whether we are decolonising the curriculum and giving our students the best chance possible. And of course, at the end, it looks at our action plan to address all of the kind of racial disparities that have been identified through that process. So it's quite a rigorous process, which is probably why not many organisations have achieved this yet. This is an award that UCLan is seeking to achieve. We are seeking to achieve it in the next academic year, and put our submission together. And Sueli and lots of colleagues around the university are working on the submission to see what we can do to improve disparities that we have. So moving from the sector to the university and what we are doing in this area, we kind of put in place quite a robust equality, diversity and inclusion governance and operating framework. So we've kind of taken a whole institution approach here, which is led by our Deputy Vice Chancellor. And this kind of outlines all of the things and groups that we'll be looking at, different aspects of inequalities, including racial inequalities in the institution. My role is fairly new. I was appointed 12 months ago to oversee the work of EDI here at UCLan, and we have a team, small team, to work on these issues with colleagues across the university. But what we have done is put in place some institutional goals that we want to achieve over the next 7 years. And I think Sueli mentioned earlier on that change takes time. Change is not going to happen, overnight. And so, we think a 7-year plan is sensible. So the 4 broad goals, and each of these goals has some very detailed numbers that sit underneath them, is that we want to improve the diversity of our staff profile here at UCLan. We want to eliminate and narrow those student outcome disparities. We want to enhance our inclusive culture and sense of belonging. And we also want to develop a national and international research profile around equality, diversity, and inclusion. And that means that we need to look at our curriculum, it means to look at our staffing, look at all, the whole environments of the physical environments of our university, and also our research focus. So I think just very quickly and in summary, our anti-racist approach here is acknowledging that racism and racial disparities exist. It is using the data, both quantitative data, but also qualitative data to inform our approach as we move forward, to ensure that we have a deliberate and a proactive approach to addressing racism, that is backed up with plans, because getting rid of racial disparities doesn't just happen. I think you have to put in place plans which are backed up by resources to make those changes, to call out racism when we see it, and to make sure that we have senior level accountability within the organisation to ensure that we do keep moving forward. And I think I'll stop there and say thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Muito obrigada, professor. Muito interessante, muito importante a gente conhecer.
Thanks a lot, Professor. It is very important to know how the UK and Int'l has developed its policies, its anti-racist policies. And now we're going to the second part of our meeting today. Professor Van Trio Pereira, doctorate, director of Sueli. I also invite him. You're welcome, Professor Manuel. You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank this invitation from the organizers of this event. And I also would like to raise the importance of this kind of meetings and events. My presentation will target some general issues about ethnic and racial topic, and I hope to talk about 4-5 central topics. Well, firstly, we're going to talk about the background of racism in the Brazilian society and its characteristics. Secondly, I'm going to talk about Black intellectuals from 1950s that contested these hegemonic theories and that showed some ways. In the second moment, I want to refer how the academia reads its role as an institution. And finally, 4 and 5, I want to show the role of Black movement. And finally, the 5th topic, I'd like to talk about anti-racist challenges within the university. I believe those are core topics that is important to understand racial issue in Brazil and its challenges. So now here I'm going to map anti-racist policies in Brazil, but I'm going to show as well some central core challenges in this issue. Well, I believe that literature has shown that what happens in Brazil is a matter of, for example, 2003 act that talks about African history teaching, the act of indigenous and African history teaching, and other acts such as the Quota Act. And I would add as well the Institute of Racial Equality, that was a central issue to build a anti-racist bloc and the base of anti-racist policies in Brazil. The problem is that when we consider this way, we limit this matter and we ignore this political analysis. And at the same time, the university is seen as a place that demands to be seen from another perspective, from another viewpoint. So I believe that we must look at this issue. What is this anti-racist policies? And I understand that it is a set of practices against racism, be it within social policies, but also on the other hand, an agenda that tackle social segregation and privileges.
Racismo, né? E aí me parece importante frisar uma leitura muito.
Speak about anti-racism, we need to speak about racism. So it's necessary to say Albert Meny reminded him that racism is the valoration of real or imaginary, characteristics to justify privileges and aggressions. This is a theoretical starting point. I start with the end of Pradeep's presentation, so we can start talking. Another important aspect that's necessary to mention, that these themes requires some cuts or some smaller observations. I said that the anti-racist should be said as a whole, but here, to the limitation of time, I'm going to concentrate in the issues of the university as a field of the anti-racism involvement. I think it's fundamental to look inside the universe, but also from the universe outside. I want to alert that seems to me to be central to this thought, to discuss power relations. It seems to me this is the main support of any anti-racist debate at the society or at the university, are the power relations, and how these power relations are conformed is the central issue and what we have to tackle. And in the sense of trying to empower some segments in the society and in the interior of the university. I say that because along the centuries here in Brazil, we have built a society based in the enslaved work, based in a structure that has valued the white person, that has valued the construction of an ideology, a racial ideology. And this process is going to see at the end of the 19th century a set of ideas that are pseudo-scientific ideas that historically this is brought to the following century as a structure of inequality in the country. In this specific case, uh, this unequal structure is from the 19th century that occupies, consolidates in the 20th century, a whitened structure that is supported by a policy of immigration stimulated by the state, and in the 1930s is going to pave, is going to support this idea of one only nation. I think that two elements are important for us to understand this. The first is the idea of a racial democracy, uh, where the centrality, and this is formulated by Gilberto Freire, anthropologist that has written a classical book, Slaves and Masters, that is going to structure a thought that is only going to be overcame, overcome in 1985. The first idea is the valorization of the Portuguese element and the idea that the prejudice is more social than racial, the emphasis in the miscegenation. So we have a common sense that Brazil is a mixed country, that we cannot say who is black, who is white, and last, that our slavery was not as violent as, for example, the slavery in North America. These four topics are central to explain why over a century the racial issue in Brazil was pushed and was put under the rug, was silenced. What has also motivated the invisibility of the black men and black women as one of the main builders of the construction of the nation, not only in the physical sense, but also in the intellectual sense. This idea will only start to be deconstructed, dismantled after the formulation of some intellectuals. I can quote Florestan Fernandes, Clóvis Moura, Abdias do Nascimento, Clóvis Ramos, and Carlos Razenbaum. These authors started to dismantle the myth of the racial democracy and start to put aside, formulate central questions to show that the post-slavery process was built in social and racial asymmetries. What has defined the place of the black people outside of the schools. So we have research that show from the late 19th century until 1950s, a process based in the eugenics and the whitening, and has pushed it outside of the school the black population. And we are not even questioning the higher education. Abdias do Nascimento pointed out how the housing conditions, the works, and the cultural practices of black people were totally uh, erased and in the idea of a white nation. And at the end, the covering up of the processes that erased black people contribution and participation in the Brazilian history. This was denounced by these new theoreticians, and this has favored the racial asymmetry between blacks and whites. This process, it's necessary to say that I mentioned some authors here. I mentioned Abdias do Nascimento, I mentioned Clóvis Moura, I mentioned Guerreiro Ramos. These three are black authors. All of them were not in the academic benches, they were not intellectuals in the academic space in Brazil. So it's important to highlight that these authors, that the Brazilian academia, that the racial critic in Brazil, the racial critic did not started inside the university, with few exceptions, like Florestan Fernandes, Emília Viotti da Costa, white professors who produced fantastic studies about Black people in Brazil. But it did not start in the university, in the Brazilian university, a strong criticism to the racism. These are all critical, actions that came from outside of the university first. Second element, it's necessary to understand that the central role occupied by the racial issue in Brazil, it is manifested, it happens from the actions of the Black social movement. I want to point out two special moments. First was 1978, the first image, a great act in 1978, the unified Black movement from the death. This act was called because of the killing of a Black worker in São Paulo, and this is in the context of the confrontation to the military dictatorship and giving, the military dictatorship starts from 64 and 85, that has taken away political rights and has silenced it as a crime against the nation, as patriotic crime, anybody who talking about racism in Brazil as well. So this movement has an important role from 1978 to 1995. 1995, we celebrated 300 years of the death of Zumbi dos Palmares, a great Black leader who led an important movement in the 16th, 17th century. So the 300 years of Zumbi dos Palmares, this manifestation that was led by the Black movement, delivered to the federal government a document with policies for racial equality, for citizenship and life. And it's the first time that the government admits and creates an interministerial group of work, interministry group of work. And then later it happens the seminar of multiculturalism and racism, an international one in 1996 as a result of that working group. The first time it's the recognition from the president that racism exists in the country. Until then, it was denied. The president then, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, opens this seminar, and from his action, he is going to stimulate, along with the Black movement. I want to talk about the importance of this relationship between state and social movement in the confrontation of racism. I'm calling your attention for this information because I had said that the state policy from the late 19th century until 1950s are state policies that the state stimulate racist policies. Here in 1996 is the beginning of a process of a state that start to admit the need of public policies. And the state does that, together with the social movements. And this this action together is important, that the Brazilian presence in Durban. So the Brazilian presence in Durban has a protagonist role, and the laws that I mentioned before has a support in the Brazilian government, the political will to do that. At this moment, we have several spaces that have already Black people in their in their groups. I said that since the 80s, São Paulo has already some Black people in the state government, and in Durban in particular this time, the the central role of the Black Brazilian women. I want to advance to point some central questions for our discussion here. I mentioned the pillars of the anti-racist policies, political policies in Brazil, and I want to talk especially about the quota law. The quota law opens a new chapter in the Brazilian history. First of all, it produces a public debate around racism. Second, the percentage increase of Black youth that was 15 to 20% to something close to 60%. Well, this percentage says that is not, some authors are saying that's not totally correct, and we have to refine. But anyhow, the growing demand from the collective of students and the Black students collectives are fundamental, and the collective of Black professors are also important. What Sueli and Tamiri said of this epistemological renovation, and this the last point from this impact of the quotas of a larger engagement on the gender, LGBTQ plus. I wanted to now to point some challenges of this anti-racist policy in the universe. Just to let him know that the time is almost over. I'm not sure you had seen. I'm sorry. I had seen, and I'm concluding. I have just another slide to finish. I would like to point among these points. I wanted to talk about the need to realize the importance of data collection, of creating of indicators. We really don't have enough. The broadening of the offering of quotas in the graduation courses, we have to increase that number. You know, the importance to value the traditional knowledges, because this impact about the new forms of reading, and it's important to start to discuss new places for the relations of power inside the universities. And I wanted to point, to conclude, in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, our university council that has 50 Black members, 50 members, and from the 50 members, there are only 3 Black members. So you can see the relation of power, how it's possible to implement anti-racist policies. And to really close, Pradeep also mentioned this, to talk about the structure that's organized in the UCLan. We need to create our own structure in our university, our own commission for the promotion of anti-racist and racial ethnic, promotion. And both it was pointed by other people who spoke before me. We have to centralize these policies. Otherwise, we are going to have the items all separate. And I'm open for the dialogue next.
Thanks a lot, Professor Van Tuyl. Excellent presentation.
Apologize to the participants for the delay. We're running late a bit now, and also Professor David sent us apologies because due to ill health he could not present, and obviously we had the freedom to spend more time on the opening event and then the talks. Professor Van Tuyl, thank you very much. Professor Van Tuyl, muito obrigada. Agora vamos seguir com algumas perguntas.
Now we're gonna continue with some questions. Well, I completely understand if some of you have to leave. We have here 48 attendees. We are here with our panelists to answer our questions for the next 10 minutes max. And if everybody agrees, Professor Pradeep, Tamiris, Lucia, Professor Van Tuyl. So can we have only 10 minutes? Is it okay? Yeah, Tamiris, do you wanna take the floor? Any comments? No, it's okay. It's okay, definitely, it's fine. Well, this is our first day. Well, so I'm gonna read a question in Portuguese. Actually, we have two questions. And then we are going to give the floor to those panelists who want to comment these questions. Well, I'm gonna read in Portuguese. And they can comment and wrap up their presentation. So, question from Eliette Souza. What are the positive actions allowed in the UK? And the second one, Sueli.
Will these slides be made available to attendees? Yes, we can request authorization. Also, we have the YouTube channel, and then will be recorded there. I can put the links for the participants. We may, if you have registered on Eventbrite, you'll have access to the videos that we've been recording, and then you can access the slides through there. Yes, that's the answer.
Tem uma outra pergunta, Sueli, no Q&A.
There is another question on Q&A. The last one.
I can't see any
então eu vou colocar aqui, vou ler aqui, está escrito o seguinte. Okay. Regarding affirmative action and people in post because of this, are there any feelings, beliefs that it is seen as a less worth to get a job on this basis? As I feel in the UK, it is promoted like this negatively. Hence, why it is positive action, not affirmative action. But I feel in UK, we should go for affirmative action to get change quicker in higher education. I hope this makes sense. What are the panelists' thoughts?
Ok. Primeira resposta sobre a questão das afirmações.
Well, the first question with respect to positive, allowed positive.
Is allowed in the UK. Or positive actions.
The positive actions that are allowed in the UK. Could you comment on this, Pradeep, please?
Yeah, sure. We can basically do anything short of positive discrimination or affirmative action. So we can do things like advertising specific journals or particular areas that we know that the group we are looking for may access. We can put on training programs for particular groups of staff or students to help their career development. So there are a range of things that we can do. It's not always easy. So there are lots of things that we can do in that space, as I mentioned, but we can't select people for jobs just because they are Black or because they are Asian, as I think you can do in Brazil. And just commenting on the second question as well, positive discrimination here in the UK, I think there probably would be generally a negative view of that. I don't think it's viewed positively necessarily. People think that people should get jobs on merit rather than on the colour of their skin. But also I agree with the comment that we have tried over many years to change the diversity profile of many organisations, and it's really not working. Positive action really is having limited impact in terms of what we can achieve through that. So I would agree with, if we want to make change quicker, positive discrimination or affirmative action would be an easier way to do it.
Thank you, Pradeep. Professor Van Tuyl, would you like to say anything about Professor Van Tuyl on the question on merit versus quotas?
Rapidamente. Bom, sendo breve, eu acho que esse é
Well,
debate.
to be brief, I believe this is a debate that I usually discuss firstly I ask, what is merit? So the concept of merit, at least in Brazil, it was founded. It was the idea of a person's capacity being the main point of view, but the thing is that in Brazil, at least, from where we started, Blacks and whites, we never started from the same place. Education access to Black people in Brazil till 1930s and 1950s was really limited. During 1970s, when I was a university student, I could count on my hand the number of Black students that were my colleagues. So the concept of merit needs to be relativized. It happens only when the different people have the same opportunities. It's just like considering a football team with 7 players and another team with 11 players. So they are not going to play in a fair way. So this is the discussion of merit. And with respect to the second question, there was this concern that students would be labeled as quotists. And the second concern was that the quality would drop. But research shows that students from quota in some courses have greater results than the other students. And besides, the dropout rate is lower between quota students. So those are issues that we need to think from another perspective, I believe.
So it's interesting to say here how the discussions about not making it illegal to have quotas, which is illegal here in the UK. Obviously, the process of legislation in the UK is quite quite different than in Brazil. And then it is possible to start something like that, but it needs some political intervention. Pradeep, would you like to?
Just the question again, sorry.
Currently, how are the discussions about not making it illegal to have quotas?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't think there is much political discussion going on around positive discrimination. It does come around every now and again, but recently there's not been a huge amount of political discussion. Maybe there needs to be a kind of a resurrection of that discussion, because clearly things are not changing fast enough, either within the student body or within the staff body. So I think that's definitely something to take back. And I think I'd be quite interested in continuing this discussion and URFJ's kind of experiences around affirmative action, to understand what's going on there and how it's been received, and what the research is showing. I'm very interested in that merit point that Professor Van Tuyl was raising there, and how we conceptualize that. But I think at the moment that there's not a huge amount of appetite for positive discrimination in the UK, I don't think, but happy to see what other colleagues have got to say about that.
Because by the presentation of Dr. Lucia and Van Tuyl, the movements, the social movements, was a big pressure, whether we don't have much at the moment in Brazil. Não sei se a doutora Luísa e Van Tuyl gostariam de contribuir nessa resposta, de como foi o processo de tornar na legislação do Brasil.
So, Professor Van Tuyl and Lucia, would you like to contribute? How was the process in Brazil about legal quota and affirmative action? How did it happen?
A partir da minha história de vida.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. As Professor Pradeep has shown, the picture showing the equality, inequality, equity, where smaller kids could not see the game with the fence. And he also showed the vision when kids could see the playing the game of the other side of the fence. But on the last picture, there is no fence, so the kids could see the game. My personal life tells a lot about this. I was born in favela Vigário Geral. At the time, it was not what it is today. We didn't have as much violence as we have today. And the reality is that I am not a product of quota. And once I thought, why all my friends used to say, I'm gonna meet my old friend. And once I realized that I did not have my old friends. I don't have my childhood friends because they could not live till today. They are not here amongst us. That is because, despite the fact that I got here, the path was very hard, was a harsh and difficult way. So quotas are not a privilege. So quotas is to offer to those who do not have the condition to perceive, is to give the other the possibility to live in a free way. And yes, I do believe that quotas are necessary. And then at that moment, I stopped, I looked back, and I helped, and I help each one to re-arrive where I arrived. That's it. Thank you very much, Professor Luzia. Well, I believe we are a little bit delayed. Thank you very much for our panelists here present. Thanks, Tamires, Nudes Institute, UFRJ, UCLAN, Grace. Thanks a lot. Our Global Race Center for Equality, for Racial Equality. We also thank our collaborators, UFRJ students, our colleagues at UCLAN, our interpreters, and for a matter of justice, unfortunately, we must wrap up, but we will continue on Friday with other 2 workshops. I thank a lot the ladies from Minka who produced the marketing material for this workshop, and also Paula and Gabriela for the interpreting of our event. Tamires? Well, thank you. So on Friday, we have 2 other workshops. For those who have not signed in for the workshops, on Friday, we're gonna discuss opportunities for Black women within universities. We are gonna have Professor Anna from Nudes Institute, Professor Champicas from UCLAN, and right after, we're gonna have 2 workshops, and then we are going to discuss the pandemic and racial inequalities within the universities. So see you on Friday. Thank you all. Well, we are gonna send a assessment form so we can optimize next events. Thank you very much. Take care and see you on Friday. Thank you very much.
Estamos deixando